The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic and straightened his bearskin hat. At 28, he had been serving as a Queen's Guard for 6 years, and the routine had become second nature to him. The weight of his rifle, the precise timing of his steps, the unwavering focus required to maintain the stoic expression that tourists expected, all of it was ingrained in his muscle memory. James took his position at the main entrance, replacing his colleague who had completed the previous shift. The early morning air was crisp, and he could already see the first wave of tourists beginning to gather near the gates. Tour buses were pulling up in the distance, and he knew that within the hour, the area would be bustling with visitors from around the world, all eager to catch a glimpse of the famous guards in their iconic uniforms. The Queen's Guard had a reputation that stretched far beyond the borders of England. People traveled thousands of miles just to see them, to test their legendary composure and to capture the perfect photograph. James had witnessed it all. Tourists making funny faces, telling jokes, even attempting to distract the guards with elaborate performances. He had learned to tune it all out, focusing instead on his duty to protect the royal residence and maintain the dignity of the position. As the morning progressed, the crowd grew thicker. School children pressed against the barriers, their teachers explaining the history and significance of the guards. Elderly couples snapped photos with their phones, while young backpackers tried to get creative with their selfies. James remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his breathing steady and controlled. Around mid-morning, a group of 5 young men approached the area where James stood guard. They appeared to be in their early 20s, carrying expensive cameras and wearing designer clothes that suggested they were well-off tourists rather than local troublemakers. Their accents, when James caught snippets of their conversation, sounded American, possibly from California or New York. He couldn't be sure. The group seemed different from the typical tourists. While most visitors showed a certain level of respect, even when trying to get reactions from the guards, these young men had an air of entitlement about them. They spoke loudly, laughed boisterously, and seemed to view the entire experience as nothing more than entertainment designed specifically for their amusement. One of them, a tall blonde young man wearing an expensive watch, appeared to be the leader of the group. He kept pointing at James and making comments to his friends, though James couldn't make out the exact words. The group huddled together, whispering and occasionally bursting into laughter while looking directly at him. James had dealt with similar situations before. Some tourists, particularly younger ones, seemed to think that the guards were merely performers rather than active military personnel. They failed to understand that behind the ceremonial uniform was a trained soldier with real responsibilities and the authority to take action when necessary. The blonde tourist pulled out his phone and began recording, walking closer to James while his friends encouraged him from behind. This was nothing unusual. Hundreds of people recorded the guards every day. But something about this group's energy felt different. There was a mischievous quality to their behavior that put James on alert, even as he maintained his stoic exterior. "I bet you $100 I can make him move, Sight," the blonde tourist said to his friends, loud enough for James to hear clearly. His companions laughed and began pulling out their wallets, apparently ready to take the bet. James remained perfectly still, but internally he was preparing for whatever foolishness was about to unfold. The tourist approached even closer, now standing just a few feet away from James. He began making exaggerated facial expressions, trying to catch the guard's eye. When that failed to produce any reaction, he started telling jokes, each one louder and more inappropriate than the last. His friends recorded everything, treating the entire situation like a social media stunt. After several minutes of failed attempts to get a reaction, the group stepped back and began discussing their next move. James could hear fragments of their conversation, something about taking it to the next level and going viral. The phrase that caught his attention most was when one of them mentioned tying him up, followed by explosive laughter from the others. At first, James assumed it was just talk, the kind of bold statements young people make when trying to impress their friends. But as he observed their body language and heard more of their planning, he began to realize they might actually be serious about escalating their prank. The security protocols for situations like this were clear in James's mind. As a Queen's Guard, He was authorized to take appropriate action to protect himself, the royal property, and maintain order. However, the guidelines also emphasize the importance of remaining professional and avoiding unnecessary confrontations with tourists when possible. James subtly signaled to his colleagues stationed at the next post, a slight movement of his eyes that would be invisible to the tourists but clear to another trained guard. His colleague, Corporal Sarah Williams, had noticed the group as well and was already aware that a situation might be developing. The tourists continued their planning, occasionally glancing at James to make sure he wasn't paying attention. They seemed to believe that his stoic expression meant he was completely unaware of their presence and intentions. This was a common misconception among visitors who didn't understand that the guards were highly trained to maintain awareness of their surroundings while appearing motionless. As the group's conversation became more animated, other tourists in the area began to take notice. Some moved closer, sensing that something interesting was about to happen, while others, perhaps more aware of the potential seriousness of the situation, began to distance themselves from the area. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky and the tourist crowds continued to grow. The 5 young Americans had been at the location for nearly an hour now, and their behavior was becoming increasingly bold and disruptive. James knew that whatever they were planning would likely happen soon, and he mentally prepared himself for what could be a very serious breach of protocol that would require an immediate and decisive response. The blonde tourist, who had introduced himself to his friends as Tyler, reached into his backpack and pulled out what appeared to be a length of rope. His companions immediately began protesting, with one of them saying it had gone too far, but Tyler waved off their concerns with a laugh that was too loud and too confident. "Come on, guys, it's just a joke," Tyler said, holding up the rope for his friends to see. "These guys are like statues. He won't even know what's happening until it's over. We'll untie him right away and show him we're just having fun." James watched this development through his peripheral vision, his training kicking into high gear. What had started as typical tourist behavior was now crossing into dangerous territory. The rope wasn't just a prop or a joke anymore. It represented a real threat to his safety and a serious breach of security protocol. Corporal Williams had moved slightly closer to James's position, maintaining her own guard stance while positioning herself to respond if needed. The 2 guards had worked together many times before, and they communicated through subtle signals that years of training had made second nature. Other tourists in the immediate area began to sense the tension. A middle-aged couple from Germany moved their children away from the scene, while an elderly British man stepped forward and addressed Tyler directly. "Young man, I don't think you understand what you're doing," the British tourist said firmly. "These are not actors or performers. They are actual soldiers, and what you're planning could get you into serious trouble." Tyler laughed dismissively and turned to face the older man. "Look, Grandpa, we're just having some fun. Nobody's getting hurt, and we'll untie him in like 30 seconds. These guys are paid to stand there and look pretty for tourists, right? So we're just giving everyone a better show." The older man shook his head and walked away, pulling out his phone. James couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but he suspected the man was either calling security or recording the situation as evidence of what was about to unfold. Tyler's friends were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the plan. One of them, a shorter young man with dark hair, grabbed Tyler's arm and tried to convince him to abandon the idea. "Dude, this is crazy. You could get arrested for this. These guards have guns and there's probably security cameras everywhere. Let's just take some normal pictures and get out of here." But Tyler was too caught up in the excitement and the attention he was receiving from the growing crowd of onlookers. Social media fame seemed to be his primary motivation, and he was determined to create content that would go viral, regardless of the consequences. "Look, I'll be super careful," Tyler said, beginning to uncoil the rope. "I'll just loop it around him a few times, we'll get the shot, and then we'll untie him immediately." "What's he gonna do? Break character?" "His whole job is to stand there no matter what happens." James was now facing a critical decision. His training covered many scenarios, but tourists attempting to physically restrain a guard was not something that happened often. The protocols were clear about maintaining position and composure, but they also emphasized the paramount importance of personal safety and security of the royal premises. The crowd around them had grown to nearly 50 people, with more tourists stopping to see what was causing the commotion. Some were taking pictures and videos, apparently thinking this was some kind of scheduled entertainment. Others looked concerned and were keeping their distance. Tyler approached James slowly, rope in hand, speaking in what he apparently thought was a reassuring tone. "Hey there, soldier boy. I'm just going to tie you up for a quick photo, okay? Nothing personal, just want to get a cool shot for my Instagram. You'll be famous." As Tyler reached out with the rope, James made his decision. The moment the tourist's hands made contact with his uniform, James stepped slightly to his right, breaking his rigid stance for the first time in hours. The movement was small but decisive, and it immediately caught Tyler off guard. "Sir, step back immediately," James said in a clear, authoritative voice that cut through the noise of the crowd. It was the first time he had spoken in hours, and the sudden sound of his voice caused several tourists to jump in surprise. Tyler froze for a moment, apparently shocked that the guard had actually responded. But instead of backing down, he seemed to interpret this as part of the performance he thought he was creating. "Oh, he talks," Tyler said to his friends, grinning widely. "This is even better. Come on, just let me get one quick shot with the rope and then you can go back to your statue thing." Tyler reached out again, this time more aggressively, attempting to loop the rope around James's shoulders. This was the moment that transformed the situation from a tourist prank into a serious security incident. James reacted with the speed and precision of his military training. He grabbed Tyler's wrist with his free hand, applying just enough pressure to make it clear that resistance would be painful. With his other hand, he raised his rifle to a defensive position, not pointing it at anyone but making it visible and ready. "Release the rope and step back now," James commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "You are interfering with a Queen's Guard in the performance of his duties." The crowd of tourists suddenly realized this was not entertainment. Several people screamed, and parents quickly pulled their children behind them. Cameras continued to record, but now they were capturing something very different from what anyone had expected. Tyler, still not fully grasping the seriousness of the situation, tried to pull his wrist free from James's grip. "Come on, man, it's just a joke. Let go of me." But James's training had prepared him for exactly this type of escalation. With Tyler's wrist still in his grip and the rope now on the ground between them, he activated the emergency protocol that would bring immediate backup to his position. Using a small radio device attached to his uniform, James pressed the emergency button that would alert the castle's security team and military command that a Queen's Guard was under direct threat and required immediate assistance. The signal went out instantly to multiple locations throughout the castle complex and to the Metropolitan Police, who maintained a constant presence in the area. Within seconds, security personnel throughout the facility were mobilizing to respond to what was now classified as a potential assault on a member of the Queen's Guard. Tyler finally seemed to realize that his prank had gone too far, but it was already too late. The wheels of military and security protocol had been set in motion, and there was no stopping what was about to happen next. The emergency signal from James's radio triggered an immediate response from multiple security units throughout Windsor Castle. In the central command center, located deep within the castle's secure interior, alarms began sounding as monitors lit up with red warning indicators. Staff Sergeant Patricia Holmes, the duty commander, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Code Red, Guard Post 7, she announced into her headset, her voice calm but urgent. "Possible assault on Queen's Guard Mitchell. All available units respond immediately." The response protocol for an attack on a Queen's Guard was comprehensive and swift. Within 30 seconds of James pressing his emergency button, armed police officers from the Metropolitan Police's Specialized Protection Unit were running toward his position. At the same time, castle security guards, military personnel, and even plainclothes officers who had been mingling with the tourists began converging on the scene. Tyler, still trying to pull his wrist free from James's iron grip, was becoming increasingly panicked as he began to understand that this was not going according to his plan. His 4 friends had backed away significantly, with 2 of them already trying to disappear into the crowd of tourists who were either fleeing the scene or pressing closer to record what was happening. "Look, I'm sorry, okay?" Tyler said, his voice rising with anxiety. "I didn't mean anything by it. It was just supposed to be funny. Can you please let go of my wrist?" James maintained his grip and his professional demeanor, but he could hear the approaching footsteps of the response team. His years of training had taught him to control situations like this until backup arrived. And he was executing that training perfectly. Corporal Williams had moved to a supporting position, her own rifle ready and her eyes scanning the crowd for any additional threats. The situation had transformed from a tourist prank into a potential security incident that required multiple guards to assess whether Tyler was acting alone or as part of a larger threat. The first to arrive on the scene was Constable David Chen, a member of the Metropolitan Police's Armed Response Unit. He appeared seemingly from nowhere, having been conducting routine patrols in civilian clothes when he received the emergency call. Chen quickly assessed the situation and immediately took control. "Armed police," Chen announced loudly, causing the crowd to step back even further. "Everyone remain calm and stay where you are." Chen approached Tyler and James, his hand resting on his sidearm but not drawing it. His presence immediately changed the dynamic of the situation, as Tyler realized he was now dealing with actual law enforcement rather than what he had assumed was a ceremonial guard. "Sir, I need you to release the rope and comply with the guard's instructions," Chen said to Tyler in a tone that brooked no argument. "Place your hands where I can see them and step back slowly." Tyler's face had gone pale as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. I'm an American tourist and I was just trying to take a funny picture. I wasn't going to hurt anyone." "Sir, you attempted to physically restrain a member of Her Majesty's Guard with rope," Chen replied. "That constitutes assault and interference with military personnel in the performance of their duties. You need to comply with instructions immediately." More security personnel continued to arrive. 2 additional armed police officers approached from different angles, while castle security guards began establishing a perimeter to control the crowd of tourists. The response was impressive in its speed and coordination. Less than 3 minutes had passed since James had activated his emergency signal. Captain Rebecca Morrison, the commanding officer for the Queen's Guard unit, arrived on the scene wearing her full dress uniform. As she approached, both James and Corporal Williams snapped to attention while maintaining their readiness to respond to any escalation. "Sergeant Mitchell." "Report," Captain Morrison commanded. "Ma'am, American tourist attempted to bind me with rope for purposes of taking photographs," James reported crisply. "Subject made physical contact with my uniform and ignored verbal commands to desist." "Emergency protocol activated at 11:47 hours. Captain Morrison surveyed the scene, taking in Tyler's friends who were now being questioned by additional officers, the crowd of tourists who were being moved back to a safe distance, and the rope lying on the ground between Tyler and James. Tyler's friends were discovering that being associated with someone who had just assaulted a Queen's Guard was not a minor inconvenience. Officer Sarah Jenkins was asking for their identification and inquiring about their knowledge of Tyler's intentions. The friends were trying to distance themselves from the incident, claiming they had tried to talk Tyler out of his plan. "We told him not to do it," the dark-haired friend was saying. "We said it was a bad idea, but he wouldn't listen. We're just tourists, we don't want any trouble." Meanwhile, Tyler himself was learning that his assumptions about the Queen's Guards had been completely wrong. These were not costumed performers hired to entertain tourists. They were active military personnel with full authority to protect themselves and the royal premises. "I didn't know," Tyler kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "In America, we have people dressed up at Disneyland and stuff. I thought this was the same thing. I didn't realize they were real soldiers." Constable Chen was documenting the incident, taking statements from witnesses and photographing the evidence, including the rope that Tyler had intended to use. The seemingly innocent prank was being treated as a serious criminal matter, with potential charges including assault, interference with military personnel, and disturbing the peace. The crowd of tourists was being managed by additional officers who had arrived to ensure that the incident didn't escalate further. Many tourists were voluntarily providing their contact information as witnesses, while others were being asked to delete any photos or videos they had taken for security reasons. One elderly American tourist approached Officer Jenkins with obvious concern. "Excuse me, officer, but I tried to warn that young man that he was making a mistake. I saw him planning this with his friends, and I told him these were real soldiers, not performers. He wouldn't listen." This witness statement would become crucial evidence in the case against Tyler, as it demonstrated that he had been warned about the seriousness of his actions, but had chosen to proceed anyway. Back at the center of the incident, Tyler was still trying to negotiate his way out of the situation. "Look, can't we just call this a misunderstanding? I'll apologize to the guard and we can all move on. I'm supposed to fly back to Los Angeles tomorrow." Captain Morrison addressed Tyler directly for the first time. "Sir, you have committed a serious offense against a member of Her Majesty's Guard. This is not a matter that can be resolved with an apology. You will be processed according to British law." The full scope of Tyler's legal troubles was beginning to become clear, and his flight back to Los Angeles was looking increasingly unlikely to happen as scheduled. Within 5 minutes of the initial emergency call, the scene outside Windsor Castle had been completely transformed. What had started as a typical tourist day had become a full-scale security operation involving multiple law enforcement agencies, military personnel, and specialized units that most visitors never see. Detective Inspector Michael Thompson arrived as the senior investigating officer, bringing with him a team of specialists trained in incidents involving threats to royal security. His first priority was to determine whether Tyler was acting alone, or if this was part of a larger coordinated threat against the royal family, or the castle itself. Tyler was now in handcuffs, sitting in the back of a police vehicle while Thompson interviewed him. The young American was clearly in shock, repeatedly asking how a simple prank had escalated so quickly into what appeared to be a serious criminal investigation. "I need you to understand the gravity of what you've done," Thompson explained to Tyler. "You didn't just interfere with a tourist attraction. You physically assaulted a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces while he was protecting a royal residence. In British law, this carries severe penalties." Tyler's expensive clothes and confident demeanor from earlier in the morning had been replaced by anxiety and confusion. "But I watch videos online all the time of people messing with these guards. They never react like this. I thought it was all just for show." Thompson had dealt with similar misconceptions before. Social media had created a distorted view of the Queen's guards, with viral videos often showing minor interactions, but never the serious consequences that could follow genuine security breaches. "Those videos showed tourists making faces or telling jokes," Thompson replied. "What you attempted to do was physically restrain a guard with rope. That crosses the line from harmless interaction to criminal assault." Meanwhile, Tyler's 4 friends were being processed separately. Each was being questioned about their knowledge of the plan, their relationship with Tyler, and whether they had been involved in planning the incident. Their expensive cameras and phones were being examined to determine if they had recorded any evidence of premeditation. The friend who had tried to talk Tyler out of the prank, Michael Chen from San Francisco, was cooperating fully with the investigation. "We met Tyler on this trip," he explained to Officer Jenkins. "We're all staying at the same hotel in London and we started hanging out. But when he started talking about tying up the guard, we told him it was crazy. We never thought he'd actually do it." The social media aspect of the incident was becoming increasingly important to the investigation. Tyler's Instagram account showed a pattern of increasingly elaborate pranks and stunts, each designed to generate more views and followers than the last. The rope incident appeared to be his attempt to create content that would go viral, regardless of the legal consequences. Back at the scene, the security response was being carefully documented. Captain Morrison was conducting her own investigation into how well her guards had handled the situation and whether any improvements needed to be made to their protocols. "Sergeant Mitchell handled this textbook perfectly," she noted in her preliminary report. "He maintained composure, issued clear warnings, activated emergency protocols at the appropriate time, and secured the threat without escalating to unnecessary force." The incident was also being reviewed by the castle's security team to determine if there were any vulnerabilities that Tyler had exploited. The fact that he had been able to get so close to a guard with rope raised questions about how tourists were being monitored and whether additional barriers were needed. Colonel James Harrison, the overall commander of Windsor Castle Security, arrived to assess the situation personally. His presence indicated how seriously the military hierarchy was taking this incident. An attack on any member of the Queen's Guard, even an unsuccessful one, was treated as an attack on the royal family itself. "This will serve as a reminder to all our personnel about the importance of constant vigilance," Colonel Harrison announced to the assembled security team. "Even seemingly harmless tourists can pose genuine threats, Tyler's legal troubles were mounting by the hour. In addition to the assault charges, he was now facing potential charges related to planning to commit an offense, disturbing the peace, and interfering with royal security. British law took crimes against the monarchy and its protectors very seriously, and Tyler was discovering that his American citizenship would not protect him from the full weight of the legal system. His parents in Los Angeles had been contacted by the American consulate, and they were already making arrangements to hire a British solicitor to represent their son. The family's initial reaction had been disbelief. How could their son, who was supposed to be on a harmless tourist trip to Europe, end up facing serious criminal charges in a foreign country? The media had begun to take notice of the incident as well. Several journalists had received tips about an American tourist being arrested at Windsor Castle, and they were beginning to investigate the story. The potential for international headlines about American tourists disrespecting British royal traditions was significant. Tyler's hotel room was being searched by police as part of the investigation. They were looking for any evidence that he had planned the rope incident in advance, which would upgrade the charges from a spontaneous prank to a premeditated assault. They found several items that suggested planning, including notes about guard schedules and research about Windsor Castle security procedures. The 4 friends were released on bail but were ordered to remain in the United Kingdom until the investigation was complete. Their own travel plans were now in jeopardy, and they were facing the prospect of extended stays in London while serving as witnesses in Tyler's case. Detective Inspector Thompson was building a comprehensive case that would demonstrate the seriousness of Tyler's actions and their potential impact on royal security. The incident would likely result in policy changes about how close tourists could get to the guards and what items they could carry in the vicinity of royal residences. James Mitchell, meanwhile, had been relieved of duty for the day and was being debriefed about the incident. As the primary victim of the assault, his testimony would be crucial in any prosecution. He was also being offered counseling services, as incidents like this could be psychologically challenging even for experienced military personnel. The ripple effects of Tyler's 5-minute prank were spreading, far beyond what he could have imagined. When he first pulled out the rope that morning, his attempt to create viral content had instead created a serious international incident that would follow him for years to come. 3 weeks after the incident at Windsor Castle, Tyler Jackson found himself sitting in a London courtroom, facing charges that could result in up to 2 years in prison. The viral fame he had sought through his prank had materialized, but not in the way he had imagined. News outlets across the globe had picked up the story of the American tourist who tried to tie up a Queen's Guard, and Tyler had become a symbol of disrespectful tourism and cultural insensitivity. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Sarah Williams, had built a compelling case against Tyler. Security camera footage showed him planning the incident with his friends, the rope purchase from a London hardware store the day before, and his research into guard schedules and security procedures. What Tyler had claimed was a spontaneous prank was revealed to be a carefully planned stunt designed to maximize social media impact. The defendant's actions were not those of an ignorant tourist making an innocent mistake, Prosecutor Williams told the court. Evidence shows extensive premeditation, including research into castle security, purchasing rope specifically for this purpose, and ignoring multiple warnings from both his companions and other tourists who recognized the inappropriateness of his planned actions. Tyler's defense solicitor, Margaret Thompson, was attempting to portray her client as a naive young man who had made a serious error in judgment, but had never intended to cause genuine harm or security concerns. However, the evidence of planning was making this defense increasingly difficult to maintain. The case had attracted significant public attention in Britain, where respect for the monarchy and its traditions runs deep. Public opinion polls showed that over 80% of British citizens believed Tyler should face the full penalty under law, with many expressing concern that lenient treatment would encourage other tourists to attempt similar stunts. James Mitchell took the witness stand to describe the incident from his perspective. His testimony was calm and professional, but it effectively conveyed how Tyler's actions had put him in genuine danger and compromised the security of the royal residence. When the defendant approached me with rope, I had to consider the possibility that this was part of a larger attack, James explained to the court. My training requires me to treat any attempt to physically restrain me as a potential prelude to more serious violence. I couldn't know whether he was working alone or if others might be preparing to exploit my compromised position. The psychological impact on James was also addressed during the trial. While he maintained his professional composure, the incident had affected his ability to trust tourist interactions and had required him to undergo additional security training to deal with similar future threats. Tyler's parents had flown to London to support their son during the trial. Robert and Linda Jackson were struggling to understand how their son's European vacation had turned into an international incident. They had hired one of London's most expensive criminal defense firms, but even the best legal representation couldn't change the facts of what had happened. We raised Tyler to respect other cultures and to be a responsible traveler, Linda Jackson told reporters outside the courthouse. We're horrified by what he did and we understand that he must face the consequences. But we hope the court will recognize that he's a young man who made a terrible mistake, not a dangerous criminal. The 4 friends who had been with Tyler during the incident were called as witnesses. Their testimony revealed the dynamics that had led to the escalation, including their attempts to dissuade Tyler from his plan and their shock when he actually went through with it. Michael Chen, the friend who had tried most actively to stop Tyler, provided testimony that was particularly damaging to Tyler's case. Tyler knew it was wrong, Chen told the court. We all told him it was a bad idea. Other tourists warned him, but he was obsessed with creating content that would go viral on social media. He said he was willing to take the risk because the video would get millions of views. The social media aspect of the case had become a central focus of the prosecution's argument. Tyler's Instagram account, which had gained over 100,000 followers since the incident, showed a clear pattern of escalating stunts and pranks. The prosecution argued that Tyler's behavior represented a dangerous trend of individuals willing to break laws and endanger others for social media. Fame expert witnesses testified about the serious security implications of Tyler's actions. Colonel Harrison explained how the incident had forced a review of all security protocols at royal residences and had led to significant changes in how tourists were monitored and managed. The defendant's actions revealed vulnerabilities in our security posture that had to be addressed at considerable expense, Colonel Harrison testified. The rope incident has resulted in enhanced screening procedures, additional personnel deployment, and modifications to tourist access areas that will cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of pounds. The international diplomatic implications were also discussed during the trial. The American embassy had been forced to issue formal apologies to the British government, and the incident had strained relationships between tourism officials in both countries. Tyler himself finally took the stand in his own defense. His testimony was emotional and showed genuine remorse for his actions, but it also revealed the shallow thinking that had led to the incident. I thought the guards were like actors or performers, Tyler testified, tears in his eyes. I've seen so many videos of people interacting with them, and I never realized they were real soldiers with real weapons and real authority. I know that sounds stupid now, but that's honestly what I thought. When asked about his planning for the incident, Tyler's testimony became more problematic. He admitted to researching the guards, purchasing the rope, and discussing the prank with his friends, but he continued to insist that he had never intended to cause genuine alarm or security concerns. The judge, Justice Patricia Henley, had extensive experience with cases involving threats to national security and royal protection. Her questions for Tyler were pointed and revealed the shallow nature of his thinking. Mr. Jackson, you researched guard schedules. You purchased rope. You planned this incident with your companions, yet you claim you didn't understand the seriousness of your actions. How do you reconcile this contradiction? Tyler's answer revealed the extent to which social media culture had distorted his understanding of reality. Your Honor, I live in a world where everything is content. I see people doing crazy things online every day, and most of them don't face serious consequences. I guess I thought this would be the same thing. The trial was nearing its conclusion, and Tyler was about to learn that real-world actions have real-world consequences, regardless of social media fame or viral potential. Justice Patricia Henley delivered her verdict on a gray London morning that would forever change Tyler Jackson's life. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case closely. Tyler sat with his parents and legal team, his face pale with anticipation as the judge prepared to announce his fate. "Mr. Jackson," Justice Henley began, her voice carrying the weight of British legal tradition, "you have been found guilty of assault against a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, interference with royal security operations, and planning to commit an offense against the Crown. These are serious crimes that strike at the heart of our constitutional monarchy and the safety of our royal family." The judge paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle over the courtroom. Tyler's mother gripped her husband's hand tightly, while Tyler himself stared straight ahead, finally understanding the full consequences of his actions. "The evidence presented in this case reveals a pattern of behavior that is both concerning and dangerous," Justice Henley continued. "You researched security procedures, purchased equipment specifically for your planned assault, and proceeded despite numerous warnings from companions and other members of the public. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated decision to prioritize social media fame over respect for British law and institutions." The judge addressed the broader implications of Tyler's actions and the message that the sentence needed to send to potential copycat offenders. Social media has created a culture where individuals believe they can engage in increasingly dangerous behavior for the sake of viral content. This court must make clear that such thinking will not be tolerated when it threatens the safety and security of our nation's institutions. Tyler was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with the possibility of parole after 9 months. The sentence was harsh enough to serve as a deterrent to other would-be social media pranksters, but it also reflected Tyler's youth and his apparent genuine remorse for his actions. In addition to the prison sentence, Tyler was ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution to cover the costs of the enhanced security measures that had been implemented as a result of his actions. He was also banned from entering any royal residence or property for life, and his visa status would prevent him from returning to the United Kingdom for at least 10 years after completing his sentence. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of satisfaction and shock as the sentence was announced. Tyler's parents embraced each other, devastated by the harsh reality that their son would be spending the next year and a half in a British prison. Tyler himself appeared stunned, as if he still couldn't fully comprehend how a 5-minute prank had led to such severe consequences. His defense solicitor immediately announced plans to appeal the sentence, arguing that 18 months was excessive for a first-time offender with no previous criminal history. However, legal experts suggested that the appeal would likely be unsuccessful, given the seriousness of the charges and the need to send a strong message about respect for royal security. The case had far-reaching implications beyond Tyler's personal situation. Within weeks of the verdict, new security protocols were implemented at all royal residences across the United Kingdom. Tourists now faced enhanced screening procedures, stricter limits on personal items they could carry, and increased distances from the guards themselves. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about social media culture and the lengths to which people were willing to go for online fame. Several major platforms implemented new policies regarding content that showed illegal activities or dangerous pranks, using Tyler's case as a prime example of how viral content could have serious real-world consequences. James Mitchell, the guard who had been the target of Tyler's prank, was commended for his professional handling of the situation. He received a commendation from his commanding officers and was used as an example in training programs for how to properly respond to tourist incidents that escalate beyond normal interactions. However, the incident had also taken a personal toll on James. He reported feeling more anxious during his guard duties, constantly watching for potential threats among the tourist crowds. The carefree interactions with visitors that had once been a pleasant part of his job now carried an undercurrent of suspicion and wariness. The psychological impact extended beyond just James to the entire Queen's Guard unit. Additional training sessions were implemented to help guards identify potential threats earlier and to provide them with better tools for managing escalating situations with tourists. Tyler's friends faced their own consequences, though less severe than his. They were each fined $2,000 for their role in the incident and were required to complete community service in London before being allowed to return to the United States. The experience had been traumatic for all of them, transforming what was supposed to be a fun European vacation into a legal nightmare. The media coverage of the case was extensive and largely unsympathetic to Tyler. British newspapers portrayed him as the embodiment of entitled American tourist behavior, while American media focused on the harsh treatment of a young man whose prank had gotten out of hand. The cultural divide in how the incident was perceived reflected broader differences in attitudes toward authority and respect for tradition. Tyler's social media accounts, which had initially gained followers after the incident, became a source of ongoing controversy. While he gained notoriety, the content was overwhelmingly negative, with thousands of comments criticizing his behavior and expressing support for the harsh sentence he had received. During his time in Pentonville Prison, Tyler was required to participate in educational programs about British history and culture. Ironically, he learned more about the significance and history of the Queen's Guard during his incarceration than he had ever bothered to research before his ill-fated prank. His fellow inmates were not sympathetic to his situation. Many viewed him as a privileged tourist who had brought shame to his country, and Tyler found himself isolated and struggling to adapt to prison life. The reality of British incarceration was far removed from the comfortable lifestyle he had known in Los Angeles. The case became a landmark precedent for how tourist-related security incidents would be handled in the future. Legal scholars noted that Tyler's sentence reflected a zero-tolerance approach to any behavior that could be construed as threatening to royal security, regardless of the perpetrator's stated intentions. As Tyler began serving his sentence, he finally understood the true cost of his quest for viral fame. What had seemed like a harmless prank in the moment had destroyed his immediate future, cost his family tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and restitution, and created an international incident that would follow him for the rest of his life. The rope that had seemed like such a clever prop for social media content had instead become the instrument of his downfall, a symbol of how the pursuit of online fame could lead to very real and very serious consequences. Tyler's story became a cautionary tale shared in schools and universities, warning young people about the dangers of prioritizing viral content over common sense and respect for the law. Years later, when Tyler would eventually be released and return to the United States, he would discover that his criminal conviction had made him unemployable in many fields and had permanently altered the trajectory of his life. The 5 minutes of footage he had hoped would make him internet famous had instead made him infamous, serving as a permanent reminder that actions have consequences, regardless of one's intentions or the medium through which they hope to share their exploits.